Afternoon and good day. Thank you all so much for joining us today for our webinar, More to My Story, a conversation with Childhood USA and the Nomi Network about ending trafficking in Dallas, Texas. My name is Nicole Epps, and I'm the Executive Director of the World Childhood Foundation USA, or Childhood USA. And for over 22 years, our mission has been to develop solutions to end child sexual abuse, exploitation, and violence for children throughout the globe. We are one of 4 offices in Germany, Brazil, Sweden, and the United States. Today, it is my honor to partner with our friends and dear colleagues, the Nomi Network, to talk about their work ending and preventing trafficking throughout the globe, but most specifically to talk about their work in Texas. The Human Trafficking Hotline has noted that Texas is one of the top 2 states in the United States with reported cases of human trafficking, with Dallas and Houston being the most prevalent. There are 3,400 of the reported 3 million homeless youth in the United States reside in Dallas, Texas, and will be solicited for sex within 10 minutes on the street. Over 60 to 70% of homeless youth have been involved with the child welfare system. Each night in Dallas, an estimated 400 children are sold for sex. Let's take a moment. Each night in Dallas, an estimated 400 children are sold for sex. Today, Childhood USA and Nomi Network would like to have a discussion on how we can end the cycle of homelessness, trafficking, and the juvenile justice system for youth in Texas. Just a few housekeeping notes before we begin, and I share my screen with my dear friend and colleague, Kelly Gage of Nomi Network. We will be joined by panelists who will introduce themselves. Our panelists will then be asked 2 questions, but if you have any questions, we ask that you put them in the chat. And we'd like this to be a very interactive session. So please take the time to introduce yourselves to one another. This will be recorded and we will share it after our webinar. But again, there is no question that's too silly, and we're here to also ask that you share your solutions and your thoughts and the work that you're doing so that what happens in Dallas can be replicated and expanded throughout the United States. And now, without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Kelly Gage, the Director of Advancement for the Nomi Network, and also a World Childhood Foundation Brazil board member. Kelly.
Hi, Nicole. Thank you. And hi, everybody out there. Thank you so much for hosting this truly important webinar with this topic of conversation. You know, it never ceases to amaze me when I'm talking to people about trafficking and they're educated people very much surprised to hear trafficking in the United States. So yes, I am the Director of Advancement for Nomi Network and also a board member of Childhood Brazil. As Nicole said, my involvement with childhood was actually my entree into anti-trafficking work. So there's definitely a long connection to childhood and now with Nomi Network. So Nomi Network's mission, as Nicole noted, we're a global organization, and our mission is to end human trafficking by creating pathways to safe and sustainable employment, empowering women and girls to break the cycles of slavery in their family and in their communities. And so our vision is really a world without slavery in any form, where every woman and girl can truly know her full potential. And we really address this issue. I mean, there are many different ways that you can come after the issue of trafficking and modern day slavery, but we address this issue at its roots by expanding opportunities for economic stability and empowerment using our workforce development program and our adolescent girls program. WFD is how we refer to workforce development, currently operates across 7 sites in northeastern India and 1 in Cambodia, in Poi Phet. And these are areas where there are extremely high incidences of trafficking. We have a field partners model that spreads Nomi Network's targeted solutions for poverty and trafficking, while also addressing other cultural issues, no matter where it is that we're working. Our adolescent girls program really came out of our workforce development program, really becoming aware that there was an need for extended care in India, in particular for the girls in the communities and where we work. And so we work with at-risk girls, girls who have been trafficked. They're at risk for early marriage. They've left school. They really have nowhere to go. And so we really began these adolescent girls programs to address these systemic issues. And I'll get into more later on of how that kind of ties to what we're doing in Dallas. But that's kind of the background. Nomi Network is 12 years old, so not quite as old as childhood. So we're excited to have this conversation together.
Thank you so much, Kelly. And so now it's also my pleasure to introduce our panelists. We ask that you share your name, your work, and how long you have been working in this space. So I'd like to begin with Dr. Tomi Grover. Please introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. I'm Tomi Grover. I'm the North Texas Regional Administrator for the Office of the Governor's Child Sex Trafficking Team. And my work is in 48 counties across North Texas. And I'm working consistently with a variety of partners in the field. And Nomi Network is one of those, as Diana Mao has moved to North Texas. And I'm looking forward to having this conversation. She and I have had many conversations about this work in North Texas. And our work is going to be only augmented by what you are endeavoring to do as well. Thank you.
Thank you. And now Britta Holmberg, please.
Hi, I'm Britta Holmberg. I'm the Program Director and Deputy Secretary General of World Childhood Foundation Sweden. And from Sweden, we handle the international work we're doing a kind of outside the US, Germany, and Brazil. So apart from Sweden, we also work a lot in Eastern Europe, but also, for example, in South Africa, Southeast Asia, in Thailand, Cambodia, Nepal, and partly in the Philippines. And in all those countries, our main focus is prevention, so early identification and support to families and children at risk. We also provide integrated support to children that have been abused and exploited. And we work both off and online. I think I'll stop. Nicole, are you back?
Hi, Bella. Can you please introduce yourself? Thank you. I disappeared.
Sorry, am I muted?
No, we can hear you.
Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Bella Hunake. I work for HHS, ACF. I've been working within child welfare for about over 5 years now. And I'm a survivor of human trafficking. So what I try to do is work with programs and organizations like Nomi to create awareness, to inform policies that are pertaining to or attempt to address human trafficking, particularly in the child welfare system.
Thank you so much for joining us. And last but certainly not least, Albert Cervantes.
Hello, good afternoon. My name is Albert Cervantes. I'm the superintendent of the Lee Tot Center and also the Lee Tot Residential Treatment Center. They're both programs operated by the Dallas County Juvenile Department. The Lee Tot Center is a runaway shelter, and the Residential Treatment Center is a post-education residential treatment program for females here in Dallas County.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for
having us. Thank you. So before we begin our webinar and focus specifically on Texas and Dallas, I'd like to speak a little bit with Britta. If you can join us to discuss what are the specific vulnerabilities that you've identified in your work with childhood, with trafficked youth and the projects that we support internationally.
I do think, and I assume, I hope that will maybe also be confirmed by today's discussion, that what is maybe a bit unexpected is that the vulnerabilities are very similar if you work in Sweden or in Germany or in Nepal. And of course, in some of these very kind of the low-income countries, such as Nepal and Cambodia, we do see the extreme poverty and the kind of the intergenerational poverty, and also a much kind of larger exposure to traffickers. And we do see some parts of the countries where actually quite where it becomes not a common strategy, but a fairly common strategy to also to engage in sexual exploitation, and we do see that in some areas that families are sometimes at least partly aware of or understand that this is maybe not as black and white as we would hope. But I think in general what we see is, of course, a lot of them comes from very dysfunctional families. So I would say that is one of the key vulnerabilities. We see that many kind of the risk factors comes from kind of violence, substance abuse, and different forms of abuse in the families. And I think the other thing I wanted to add is that when we meet these young people, what we often see is the very kind of this quite severe trauma that they have been through, and that they often kind of struggle with a lot of shame and stigma, and kind of the how difficult it is to that you sometimes get stuck in that identity as a victim. And I think that is a really important part, and because that's also it's sometimes kind of aggravated by how we address this issue, how we talk about this issue. So I think that is a really crucial part of this. So I think the fact that it's not always as black and white, that sometimes young people that have become kind of victims of trafficking, sometimes they're very loyal to their trafficker. Sometimes they also become trapped in that kind of business. It's also this kind of processes that makes it more complex than we sometimes want to see it. Sometimes we talk about trafficking as an issue that we could prevent only through more information. But I think it is more complex than that, and I think that is also what we need to address, the kind of the risk factors that make young people vulnerable to this, despite that sometimes they do know about the risks.
No, thank you. And I think that you raised a really incredible point about the fact that the vulnerabilities and the risk factors are similar regardless of country. So drawing upon that, I'm going to ask Tommy to share what are the vulnerabilities of the trafficked youth that she works with, particularly within the foster care system that most people are not aware of in North Texas. And I would add, building upon what Britta said, most people are not aware of generally. And I know that you also have a slide that you'd like to reference, so we'll put that up as well.
Yeah, it's kind of like looking at a mosaic before it's put together. You have all the pieces thrown out on the table, or maybe even a puzzle, and you can't see what you can't see about how the mosaic's going to come together. And I don't know if the slide is up or if we're looking at the slide at this point, but we are doing the commercial sexual exploitation identification tool in Texas. And that is an information integration tool that allows us to see what we hadn't seen before about what the vulnerabilities of our kids are. And so depending on how big the slide is for you, you might be able to see the 8 categories. The 8 categories include housing and caregiving, which is a part of some of the dynamics that we're seeing that give us high prevalence. Mm-hmm. Then the other is prior abuse and trauma, physical health and appearance, environmental exposures, relationships and persons that they are engaged with, then signs of current trauma, which may mean a physical abuse, and then coercion or exploitation. And so these are the 8 key indicators from the See It tool, which is the West Coast Children's Clinic tool that was developed several years ago. And we've implemented this across the state. As I said, we've had 40,000+ of them, and housing and caregiving is the highest indicator. If there's vulnerability, it's because they have unstable housing, or they have a situation in their home that gives us pause to understand that there's challenges, which includes runaway, unstable housing, homelessness, they need services, caregiving, and lack of supervision there, school attendance, and child welfare system. And as you can see on this graphic, if you can see it, is that there's a certain percentage of our kids who have engagement with the welfare system, and then a good portion of the kids that have been screened are runaway. So this kind of gives us a snapshot of where we see the indicators in Texas from those 40,000 that have been screened. And we know that overall, there's 3 indicators that come out of this: either no concern, possible concern, or clear concern. And of the clear concern, we have about 10% generally of the kids that have been screened who show us clear concern of either being vulnerable, highly vulnerable to exploitation, or are already being exploited. And as a part of that, we have a public health response that we're doing in Texas that gives us a 5-fold strategy that is looking at how we address this in Texas. So we're doing prevention work, we're doing recognition work, we're doing recovery work, we're doing supportive healing work, and then we're doing Bring Justice, which is a piece of the puzzle of making sure that law enforcement, judiciary, and all of our systems folks have access to information that helps us to process these cases as well. So this kind of gives you an idea of the lay of the land of what we're seeing in Texas from the See It screenings that we've already done. And a lot of the same vulnerabilities that are international, we're finding they're right here. But this gives us the 8 key indicators, which might be disparate information if not put together in the tool. And the tool is a piece that helps us to integrate that information in a way that makes sense, and then give us an outcome that gives us a path to clearly giving a child services when we recognize that they are highly likely of being exploited. So we're using care coordination as a system in Texas that works through our Children's Advocacy Center. And in Dallas, we already have this in place, which is a win-win, because you're coming onto the scene in many ways in a very well organized fashion that gives care coordination a systematic way of dealing with kiddos that we know that have clear concern. And of course, law enforcement's in that group. A lot of our advocacy agencies are in that group, including children's specialized advocates that we've implemented. And so there's a lot of moving parts and pieces, but a basic public health response says we got to know what we need to know in order to be able to respond to this. And so that's a part of what the See It has helped us to now see, where we hadn't been able to see all of that information kind of come together in a really organized way.
Thank you so much, Tommy. I look forward to continuing this conversation, and I just love that there's so much coordination and that there are 8 key indicators, which I think is so helpful. I'm now going to ask Kelly to tell us a little bit more about the Nomi Network and this new program, because as we've shared earlier, Nomi Network originally is a global organization. And so I think you really are bridging kind of the gaps that Britta's speaking about and now Tommy's speaking. So what motivated Nomi Network to move to more domestic work, and then Dallas specifically?
Right. Yeah. You know, it's like Britta said and Tommy said, that these data points, and there are just so many commonalities across geographic borders and even in cultures. And so, you know, it's always this relationship in particular was somewhat organic, with Diana, one of our co-founders, actually doing a presentation at the Lee Tot Center several years ago and becoming acquainted with the programming there. And so that was the initial kind of, you know, tiny step forward in having that relationship, because we have been completely working globally. But we realized in learning more about domestic trafficking and the issues that both Tommy and Britta touched upon was that the work that we are doing globally is very transferable to what is needed in the United States. You know, I will say I sat on boards and know organizations throughout the world, and obviously I'm in the United States, and oftentimes in the United States we kind of think we know all, be all, whatever, but that's, you know, we learn from absolutely everywhere. And so I mentioned our adolescent girls program before, and you know, as I mentioned, adolescent girls really works to empower girls to break free from whatever bonds are holding them back and putting them at risk of being trafficked. So I also mentioned that in India, we work in a field partner model, and we were really capitalizing on that from what we learned in India and moving into Dallas. And we're partnering with local organizations and with LETOT in order to fill gaps in care for the girls that are a part of their program. So we're helping to complete their education and also be mentored along a path towards gainful employment and self-sufficiency. So the Adolescent Girls Program really provides personal empowerment training, career development opportunities, and continued education support for girls ages 12 to 17. And our program really builds an understanding of the evils of human trafficking, including what it is, how to recognize it, how to report it, how to guard themselves and their peers against it, etc. And we really encourage adolescent girls, no matter where we're working with them in the world, to continue their education and position themselves for promising careers by identifying and removing any barriers that stand in their way. You know, one of the cruxes, in addition to homelessness and all of those risk factors for youth, poverty is also a huge part of that, and really leaving people vulnerable to trafficking. So, you know, we really view, especially for girls, education as the strongest intervention to help girls break free from these cycles of poverty and trafficking. And why Dallas? You know, as I mentioned earlier, the United States is not exempt from these forms of modern day slavery. And Nicole, you really very nicely summed it up in the beginning as far as the data points with Texas having, you know, being one of the top 2 states, Dallas and Houston, specifically the top 2 cities in Texas. You know, there are dollar figures and that are attached to this also, that traffickers have exploited $600 million every year from labor and sex trafficking survivors in Texas. So it is a big business also. So you're working against that also. And that over $6 billion has been spent in providing lifetime care for survivors in Texas. And that is really valuable money to be spent. However, wouldn't it be great if we just didn't have to spend that money and didn't have to think about that at all? I'm not going to recap all of the instabilities that we've already talked about. I mean, it's really just very much of the vein that Britta and Tommy both specifically talked about. And we will, you know, get into some more details a little bit later, but that is how we moved into Texas and why we consider it really, really critical to be moving into this area domestically, because there is a gap. I mean, people don't really do what we're doing. And, you know, I'll talk more specifically, I think, in a little bit about the specific programming.
Thank you, Kelly. And I think it's so important. And thank you also for just sharing $6 billion, right? I mean, that number is incredible. And I think we can all think about what we could do with $6 billion.
Well, and also really thinking about the demand. I mean, the demand is out there. And there is a data point that Tommy actually shared with me that, that it is, you know, there are almost 32,000 sex ads from in December 2020. I mean, this is not something, I mean, we could go down the rabbit hole in talking about the demand side of this and what needs to be done on that side, which is not something that Nomi Network specifically addresses. But the demand is out there too. And it is a big dollar business that does not want to be taken down.
Absolutely. And I want to draw on the point, and for everyone who's sort of joining us today, the demand that we're speaking of right now is that for the month of December 2020, that's only a few months ago, right? Just a quarter ago, our law enforcement partners, 1 month ago, Yes, right. So that there were 31,995 sex ads with 8,681 profiles. And of those, 5,843 were flagged as suspected juveniles. Okay, so let's just take a moment again. 5,843 of 8,681 profiles. So more than half were suspected juveniles. And I think this is a great opportunity right now for us, not only to discuss demands, but to also learn a bit more from Albert and his work with LATOT and his work within adolescent girls. A lot of why for Childhood USA we have these webinars is because we think it's important to educate ourselves before we have this conversation, right? So before we can fix something, we need to understand the scope of the problem. So Albert, could you share a little bit about the LATOT in general, but then also any of the demographics? What are who are the adolescents that you're seeing? And just, in a way, frame this picture of who these girls and who these youth are.
Absolutely, and thank you for inviting me to this discussion as well. I think in particular, some of the vulnerabilities that the youth experience here in Dallas is just the lack of knowledge of the available resources that are out there that can assist them. Just empowering them to know that they can report this abuse and seek out assistance. I think some of the panelists spoke about the economic issues as well, not being able to find stable housing. That's one of the issues that, one of the vulnerabilities that our youth experience as well. It's just finding a stable home environment and housing for themselves. It's important that we, when we have an opportunity to work with these youth, is that we empower them and get them to know that there are individuals out there that are willing to help them and get them to a better place. Definitely. Here at LATOT, while youth are in our residential treatment program, we really strive to get them to know that there are supportive services out there that will help them and get them to a point where they're able to stand up for themselves and to break that cycle of trauma and situations that they've gotten themselves into. A lot of times. It's important for our therapists that work with them that they're trauma informed so that they understand what these youth have been through. That they've, a lot of them experienced extreme trauma. And so while we're working through therapy, getting them to one, identify different triggers that they may have that cause them to go into these spirals of, being vulnerable to being in a traffic situation. Really, what we really strive to do here at LATOT is to empower these youth to make better decisions and to really get themselves to a better place. This last month, we celebrated Women's History Month. And throughout the month, we had a variety of activities that really empowered our young ladies to see what other individuals have done, women in history, and so to expose them to that and to provide them an environment where they know that they are valued and that they do matter. And that we want them to succeed and continue providing and contributing to society as they grow. It's a very important thing. One of the things that we do here at LATOT as well is surround these youth with a very supportive environment. That includes providing them with advocates. Even while they're in detention, they're assigned an advocate that they can talk to, someone who they can trust, and that they can build a bond. And we'll continue that while they're in placement, and then also as they transition back out into the community. You asked about the demographics. We're seeing a lot of minorities, Hispanic, African American youth that are being pulled into this trafficking, and so we regardless of who the youth is, we're going to try to empower them and provide them with that supportive information while they're in placement, and to ultimately get them to a better place.
Thank you so much, and thank you for the work that you do. At some point, we will also share the link to the work of LETOT as well. I think that's a really great point that you shared about the importance of support networks.
Yes.
I think for all of our children throughout the globe, it's the importance of having support and responsible and trusted adults in your lives to help you. They are trauma informed, but also move from a victim to survivor, right? And also creating a chapter in the larger chapter of your life. So I think what's so important, and we're so glad you can join us, is about the importance of reintegration and the next steps, right, in our adolescents' life as they transition to independent living. It's at this point that I would like to speak with Bella, who works directly with the child welfare system. And Bella, if you can share a bit between your work within the foster care system and domestic human trafficking. And I think it's also important, if you can, and in your experience, but in some of the work that Childhood USA, we have seen that even when our children are in care, they may still be trafficked, right? Or they may still maintain relationships with their traffickers. And that this is also, for many of our girls, our youth, our children, girls, boys, there's no gender. It's also based on relationships. So how in your work can you describe sort of the linkages between the foster care system and domestic human trafficking? And I know that's a lot that I'm giving you to answer.
Yes.
So please feel free to frame that in the way that is best. And I think we also need to expand our definition of trafficking, that it can also be a family member as well, right? And so it's not a stranger. So sorry, Bella, I know it's quite a bit I've given you.
No, all good. Again, thank you so much for, you can still hear me, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you so much for having me today. As you mentioned, I have been working within the human trafficking field for a while. But prior to that, I want to draw everyone's attention back a little bit. I survived trafficking when I was 9 years old. I was trafficked into the country, and that really guided my passion to working with children who are victims of trafficking, or adolescents who are victims of trafficking, or people who are victims of trafficking. And that's guided my career path to working within child welfare to address the policies that I think I could have benefited from. When I meet survivors everywhere, and they share their stories or their expectations of what they think systems, whether local, organizational, or federally, can do to help them assimilate back and help them take back control from how they were violated. One of the population I particularly work with is the children in foster care. And I think to your question, with the population in foster care, there are high risk attributes that are aligned with almost every child in foster care. I would say things like PTSD, things like a history of running away, things like a history of any behavior or mental health problem, or just a sense of lack of community and support that we see in children, amongst children who are human trafficking, and lack thereof stability. And these are risk factors that we see in general in foster care, but particularly this is why you see an increased number of children in foster care being trafficked, because they're already such a protected special population. It's easier for traffickers to identify that this child is in foster care or in some kind of system, and that they can see the gap in terms of lack thereof stability and resources to address their needs. So they capitalize on that. So I'm super excited. There are many programs, obviously, across the nation that are working within this, but I'm super excited for the Nomi program. Maybe I'm being biased, but I am excited, particularly because when I work closely with them, their sense of wanting to create stability to reduce that cycle of victimization, particularly for that population, is so vital. It's so vital.
Thank you so much. And I'm not going to let you go away because we actually have a follow-up. So this is the sort of the portion in the panel where I will be asking like our second round of questions, but I really want to open it to the rest of the panel because there's some great things in the chat. Much of what you were discussing while you were talking, we were talking about familial trafficking. The younger the victim, the more likely that their family is allowing for and promoting this exchange. So I guess we're both very excited about this program for Nomi Network, and we do recognize the very significant need and the vulnerabilities that I might argue continue after being involved with the child welfare system. So can you share what your thoughts are within the system? What can the child welfare system do better to support our children and keep them safe? Because we know that the child welfare system, our focus is in preventing harm or preventing further harm. But if our children are also being harmed within the system, what are, in your opinion, and I open this also to the panel, this is not just a Bella question, what are other solutions to provide the stability and the support networks that are needed? And so we'll start with you, and then we'll see if any of our other.
That's such a massive question.
I know.
So I want to first say that we have to see this as a collaborative approach. We have to see it as a one body approach. Therapists cannot work independently just to do their part, and directors of grantees and grantors cannot say this is just our part. We have to understand how each of our involvement impact from inception all the way to finish. When we're granting, when we're requesting for grants, we have to think about, what if a child that we rescue who is in our care, what if they are needing additional services? How can we budget for that? How can we provide a holistic approach that addresses not just the mental health of the trafficking victim itself, but any other body that they might come in care with? Or come into your systems with. So I think a lot of times within my experience that everybody in the child welfare system that addresses trafficking, everybody is in their silos. They're only focused on, this is my duty as a therapist. This is my duty as a service provider. We have to know, how does your service impact this next person? Because the overall goal has to be victim-centered approach. It has to be looking at the victim as an individual who is in need of all this support, and they have to all be interconnected. If not, I don't know how much time I've seen people going through the cycle and then one thing missed and then they go back to the cycle, and that just perpetuate. It just keeps going.
Absolutely. Thank you. And Tommy, I also would like to add to this. Thank you, Tommy.
I agree. It has to be a collaboration and a lot of cooperation and aligning of systems, kind of like gears, in what used to be the old clocks. We would know what it looked like because it worked together, and all of those had to be integrated into each other. And that's one of the things that we've done at the Office of the Governor's Child Sex Trafficking team, is we actually started in the Department of Family and Protective Service a human trafficking and exploitation unit. So in Texas, we have a dedicated DFPS unit that helps to align policies, procedures, operationalize what it's going to look like for their systems folks to address trafficking within all of DFPS. We've helped them to begin identifying with much more specificity those kids that are at the highest risk, and they know that they have the general population of risk because of their history in DFPS conservatorship or in family situations. And so we've helped them to really come to understand that with much more due diligence. And we've integrated them into what care coordination looks like. At the local level, they've become a really integral partner so that they can begin addressing with all of the partners within DFPS how this functions for our kiddos who are in their care, control, and custody. And then we also have the community-based care providers who are now our privatized system within the state of Texas, which is happening in several locations, including here in North Texas in Tarrant and Johnson County. So we have all of these things starting to roll out. It is that public health mindset that we all have to be in this together. We all have to work together. We got to get upstream from what pushed this child into the river of exploitation and get behind it so that we can start looking at that. And then a part of what your question is really on this part is to how do we get also downstream once we've seen this, once you've recognized it, then how do we help them comprehensively to address these issues? And I think that is so exciting to begin to see this as a holistic, comprehensive response. And I'm just a little biased, but I think we're doing a really good job in Texas trying to get all the right partners at the table so that we're not thinking siloed anymore, that we're really trying to integrate that work with all due diligence.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Thank you so much, Bella and Tommy, for this. And I think both of you raised a great point about the importance of integration and where we are in the stream. And so, you know, we're working upstream. And right now, Albert, I want to talk a little bit about the middle of the stream, right? Because we know that for many of our youth, that they're also involved with the juvenile justice system. So can you share a little bit about how the Dallas Juvenile Department is partnering with Les Tots? But I also would like to talk about your work with communities and a population who may be resistant working within the justice and the legal system.
Absolutely. Well, as I mentioned earlier, the Les Tots Center and Les Tots RTC is they're both programs operated by the Dallas County Juvenile Department, and so that's our we're part of the Juvenile Department. We are part of the we're a division of that program or that the department. And so some of the things that we do here at Les Tots is one, first and foremost, provide a stable, safe, secure environment for our youth to be able to thrive, right? I love that Bella mentioned that what we have to do is to be a victim-centered, we take a victim-centered approach. And so really not only looking at what the youth needs, but also if there's family members, extended family members that they're going through, again, a lot of times these are generational, there's generational abuse and trauma that has occurred, right? And so it's important that when we begin working with these families that we consider the entire unit, the entire family, and if there's opportunities that we can provide that support, that's very critical. Again, that's as Bella mentioned, that's going to help close that cycle of either being re-victimized or being introduced into continual trauma. One thing that we do here at Les Tots is really drive home providing youth with skills that's going to provide them an opportunity to better cope with problem situations that they might be having, including if they have any kind of dysregulation. And so those are some of the things that we do here at Les Tots. We also give them opportunity to practice the skills that they've learned in a safe and supportive environment. The department operates a charter school in Academy for Academic Excellence. And so we provide a full educational services for all youth here at Les Tots, including vocational learning opportunities, which we continually look at, things that we can add to that. But here at Les Tots in particular, we have a strong culinary program that the youth absolutely love. They gain so many different skills from being part of that culinary program, leadership. They also learn financial literacy, but also safety, and of course, how to cook and enjoy great food, right?
Yeah.
And so that's something that they really enjoy. We've also introduced some coding opportunities for the youth, and then of course art. And there's so many ways that you can utilize art to teach youth to be able to cope with situations and so forth. And even this past holiday that we had, Easter, we had a painting activity that the girls really enjoyed, and they just fired up when you ask them about it, and you see the different things they worked on. And so just really, while they're here in treatment, providing that safe, stable environment, and then also taking into account that we're not only working with the youth, but we're working with the entire family is important. Lastly, I want to talk about preparing these youth for reentry into the community. This last year, the department introduced 3 new reentry specialist positions for the residential programs, and those individuals, again, they're reentry specialists, and so they identify needs that the youth have when they first come into placement, and then identify resources that they can provide for them as they transition back out into the community. Again, part of the key to success is to surround these youth with as many supportive and protective factors that will help these youth be able to continue to thrive in the community. Part of that is, as I spoke about earlier, the importance of having an advocate for them, someone who they can trust, that they've built that trust in that relationship with, that they can call to if they're going through a bad time. And so those are some of the things that we do provide for youth while they're here. I think you also mentioned sometimes what the department does to address situations such as when we have communities or families that are resistant to change. We strive as much as possible to involve the entire family while youth is in the programming. I think it's important to help with their buy-in, to understand what we're trying to do with their youth, but ultimately to empower them, to provide them with some skills so that they can better address their youth, and so that they can kind of break some of those. Sometimes it's I think it was mentioned earlier. Sometimes it's situations such as substance abuse that's occurring in the home. Sometimes it's violence and so forth. And so if there's ways that we, the department, can help provide something for this family to get them as a family to a better place, we're not only going to be helping them, but we're also going to be helping the community.
Absolutely, and breaking sort of the multi-generational cycles, right?
Yes, absolutely.
I hate to keep holding you, but there was just such a great question in our public chat, and it speaks specifically to this discussion of youth, but Texas as a border state. So MP has a specific question for you, which said, do you see many of the youth coming from illegal immigration situations in this border state where they perhaps are trapped or else feel permanently indebted to coyotes or cartels, and that may also be another factor when working with families if they're not open to disclosure?
I could say
I know it's
that,
a tough question, yeah. So,
and it is a tough question. However, I think that for here in Dallas, that's not something that we see that's very common. However, we do have youth that are from other countries, and that may, there's a possibility that they may have been involved in, in some trafficking as they're traveling to the United States. And so, again, we work with the youth once they get here. We utilize a variety of assessments and Tommy mentioned the See It assessment. We also have some questionnaires here at LETOT that help us identify if they're a high-risk victim. The department also has a high-risk victim coordinator, and that specializes. I know that Tommy had mentioned to me off camera that she's has frequent contact with our HRV coordinator, and so really working with the youth, identifying what needs that they have and how we can best support that youth and the family is key.
Thank you. On behalf of MP, I'm sure that they thank you as well. So thanks so much, Albert. We're going to come back to you. So I guess the next question would be to Kelly, to just go more deeply into the specifics of this new program that Nomi Network is starting in Dallas. What makes this program so unique? I think we've gotten some of the answers of the gaps that will be addressed, but also how do you feel this program can help prevent trafficking in Dallas?
Right. So Nomi Network globally works with women and girls that have either been trafficked or who are at extreme high risk of trafficking. So in our programming, as I mentioned, we're trying to move upstream, downstream. I'm not sure which direction we're going, but really trying to give the tools before somebody is trafficked. We would love to just have that happen so that we didn't ever have to work with somebody that had been trafficked. That's, as I said, the vision, ending modern day slavery. Right. So a big thing. But, we do work in multiple different countries. We work in multiple different communities, even within these countries or in these communities. And we really look at taking what we've learned at one place, and when we move into a new place, really customizing the curriculum for women or for girls, depending on the program location. So, I'm not going to get into a huge comparison of our adolescent girls program in India versus our adolescent girls program in Dallas. But in Dallas, the program will consist, it's going to be a lengthy program, starting off with 3 months of skill training, really, and tied to mentorship. Mentorship is a tried and true, proven way in order to combat at-risk behaviors, trafficking, etc. So mentorship is a crux, a core component of our Dallas program, which actually does not exist in our India program because we're working with a different culture there. So first 3 months, skills training, mentorship building, and then followed by 2 to 3 months of internship placement. And to be clear, we are, as I said, we work with field partners in India, and LETOT is the organization that we're partnering with in Dallas. And we're really growing and adding on to, I guess, the culinary arts program, all of those wonderful programs that were mentioned earlier. So those are things that we are building on. And I will say, Nomi Network is a wonderful organization. Obviously, I am involved with it, but we don't feel like we need to be all, do all, end all. We know that there are other people that are doing other things that need to be brought into the system. I think Tommy said it well, like the gears coming together. And we know that we are only, I think it would be one cog in the gears, if that's the way that you phrase it. So we're coming at it from the employment perspective and the self-reliancy perspective in financial support. So that internship placement is really, really important. And we are going to be working with multiple different companies in the Dallas area in order to place the girls into a professional development experience where they're really going to get exposure to different industries, and all the while being supported through mentors, professional mentors, personal mentors throughout the process. So we have 3 months of skills training, 2 to 3 months of internship placement, and then 12 months of follow-up and continued support to really ensure long-term impact, combat recidivism, really working the employment skills into all of that. So the mentorship component is really critical, we feel, in this programming. And it's not just professional, it's also a more holistic approach where the goal is to really surround the girls with their own little mini village to support them. So doing this in providing the workforce development services with focused mentorship and also specific skills training is really working to give opening up the horizons in terms of like a scope of hope for their futures, but also tangible plans. I mean, it is going to include college, professional, different career paths, so many different factors. And we do, through our programming in India, in Cambodia, we're working on 12 years of partnerships that we've already developed. And even though we do work globally, we have a number of very strong corporate partnerships that we've developed with workforce programs in India, and also just through, getting advice, other ways of engaging corporations in our programming. And so we're really capitalizing on that, bringing the private sector into this to create a network of employers who are not just ready and there to give a work opportunity, but they are also going to receive some training, and the mentors will also, so that they are trauma informed in the opportunities that they're giving. And I don't have a fancy PowerPoint like Tommy, sorry. But we have a lot of data on some of the barriers to employment for trafficking victims, and I could talk about those separately. But those are things that we really consider critical. It's not just we're going to pluck somebody out of here and place them over here and all sunshine and roses. We do hope it is sunshine and roses, but we're going to be doing it in a manner that is really an informed manner and an educated manner, so that we create an opportunity for success for the girls that we're going to be working with. So that is, how we are really feeling like we're adding to the fabulous work that's already being done in Dallas County, and why we feel like this partnership is really important. And just overarchingly, Nomi Network's theory of change is really looking at the fact that we view it as trafficking survivors and vulnerable women, when they are provided with job training and education regarding financial, social, health issues, and they become employable and able to provide for themselves and their families financially, that just gives them the shield to protect themselves and their families. And that really gets back to what was mentioned earlier about intergenerational trafficking, and that is extremely prevalent in India and in Cambodia. But those tools, and that's not saying that is the only thing that needs to be incorporated. Obviously, like I said, we work with partners, and we're looking at what other services are offered as really just kind of coming together, and we're providing that extra piece.
Thank you. And I think the program, of course, we are big supporters and believers of this, and particularly the focus on mentorship and just dedicated skills, not only for the employers, but the new employees as well. And I think beyond so many things that you've mentioned, I think that we're all in full agreement about economic empowerment being that shield. And I think that is not just something that is important when we're talking about trafficking. That also lends itself in intimate power, partner violence as well. To be economically empowered allows you to make different choices and have different opportunities. So we commend you for this program and look forward to learning more. And, I just wanted to add to the work that Nomi's doing and kind of pull Britta into this conversation as well, because you mentioned, Kelly, the importance of cultural competency, right? About you know,
Yes.
how you'll work in Dallas may be different than how you work in India or Nepal. And so Britta, who is also bringing Childhood's global policy work, I would love if you could share maybe a specific project that illustrates sort of the importance of economic empowerment for survivors of modern day slavery, or I guess very downstream, sort of the next steps after our clients have moved and now they're moving to the next phase or transitioning into the next phase of their lives. So please do share.
I'm happy to. Thank you.
Thank you.
And actually, I would say that just kind of confirm what I think all of us have said, that one of the keys is economic empowerment, but I would say in combination with the supporting network. I think that together becomes very strong. And I can give you one example. And again, it's just kind of amazing how similar everything is, even though, you know, Dallas, Nepal, kind of countryside. One example, we as a private foundation, our role in this field is to identify, fill gaps in kind of methods development, service delivery, identifying and supporting neglected target groups, etc. And we more or less always work with local partners. So in this case, it is a really small community-based organization in Nepal called Asa Nepal. It was founded by trafficking survivors. And when they started to work, they started to support both women and also children of trafficking survivors, sometimes children that were trafficked victims themselves, or sometimes children to victims. And before we met them, when they started to work, they worked separately with the mothers and with the children. And the children ended up in orphanages and in institutions. And they kind of helped rescue trafficking victims, put them in a shelter, worked with them for a while, and then they realized this is not a sustainable solution, because when these children come out from the shelter or the institution, they have nowhere to go, and maybe we haven't even kind of worsened their kind of risk factors, and they risk ending up in trafficking again. Or we have kind of mothers who were rescued from brothers in India, and they came home, they gave birth, and then they kind of was disconnected from their children. And when they kind of met with their child again, they didn't have kind of any connection. So that's where we came in, and we wanted to, together with them, create a program that kind of provide possibility for long-term reintegration in the community. And they base their work on interviews with trafficking survivors. So Asa Nepal, together with 2 other partners in Nepal, they interviewed 56 survivors of trafficking in Nepal, most of them coming from brothels in India. And they asked them about their needs and their hopes for the future. And what became really clear was that there are quite a lot of programs focusing on kind of rescue, shelters, the first time after the rescue. But they were kind of disengaged from their communities. And they said that the big gap is kind of long-term holistic programs that are truly empowering, including economic empowerment, but also programs that meet their individual needs. So that's the program that we helped Asa Nepal develop. Now, when they started to work in a much more complex, long-term, holistic way, it is more time-consuming. It's more kind of it requires more resources, so you can't reach as many. But they combine intensive case management, self-help groups for both parents and children. I think that's a really important factor also, because when they have kind of moved back into the communities. They've lived there for a while, and then problems start to arise, and then they can speak about that together with peers. Regular home visits to check up, health support. A lot of them have health issues when they come back. Support, help kind of connecting with the schools, with the school teachers, to help them kind of tackle problems that occurs in school, including sexual education. Of course, kind of start up or helping with getting an employment or set up a small business, if that's a kind of possibility for that person. And sometimes kind of quite basic things like rent support, because what they also saw that when these young families, children and their mothers move back into the communities to their hopefully supportive networks, there was a lot of resistance, as we also heard from you. And just being able to provide kind of simple help with the rent, for example, is a way to ensure that at least they are not seen as a burden from their families. So at least they come with something in the beginning instead of being a burden, because they were really struggling with a lot of discrimination, shaming, really, really difficult things in their communities. So it takes a really long time. But so to end, what I wanted to say, just kind of going back to the importance of economic empowerment. I think what it gives, it of course, one is this kind of, at least you're not a burden. At least you can provide for yourself, hopefully contribute to the family that you hopefully are living with. But it also creates, helps create or can recreate dignity, or and the value, kind of believe in your own value. And I think that is a really important part. And also what we saw in this project is that a lot of trafficking survivors, they struggle with domestic violence in their new relationships. And of course, if you can provide for yourself, you have other opportunities, and you can, at least you're not stuck because of economic reasons in new relationships that is violent. And that is actually the final point, that it provides opportunities, as Kelly said, new kind of hopefully hope, but kind of more kind of realistic future plans for the future with education and etc. But it also provides kind of a new network, maybe the new supporting network when you go to school or work or something with others. So I think that's kind of the dignity, new opportunities.
No, I think this is so helpful. No, and I think you've raised so many great points about not being a burden, and sort of the economic empowerment also, I would say, transforming the role of the survivor when they re-enter not only their families or their communities. I know that Kelly also would like to add something very quickly, and then I will ask Tommy to join us, because I think it's also important to build upon, Britta, what you shared about building villages within our villages, so that our survivors have the support that they need when they leave and as they expand. But Kelly, please, I know you wanted to also add to this.
Yes, no, just adding on to what Britta said, and what Tommy is going to touch on also, in that, we have seen, obviously working with women is different than working with girls. And we have seen significant changes in the communities in which we work, and the women that we work with in India in particular, and in Cambodia, but specifically thinking about the Adolescent Girls Program. And just, Britta talking about, not wanting to be seen as a burden. And, there are barriers to employment, even in other countries, when you're talking about trafficking survivors. And so really looking at giving them the tools to be self-sufficient is absolutely critical in order to break those cycles. So just wanted to add that.
No, I think that's so important, and I'm so glad that you shared that and about breaking those cycles. And
yes,
at this juncture, I'm going to ask Tommy to join us to talk a little bit more specifically to the work they're doing within the village of Northern Texas, and how you also have your commercially sexually exploited youth advocates, and also talking about the role that nonprofits who may not have that funding, what those needs are. And I think you raised a great point in the sort of the private panelist chat that needs to maybe be shared. I think for many people who are not actively in this space, there may be this assumption that, oh, well, there's federal funding for everything, right? And so this is why we're paying taxes. Why is there a need for more? So if you can maybe share that, the youth advocates, your work, your space, and the needs that so many nonprofits have, that would be helpful.
Yeah, I was going to say we couldn't do our work without the nonprofits that are out there. And a part of that is because almost all the funds that we have to do grants for commercially sexually exploited youth advocates and advocate programs come through VOCA, so the Victims of Crime Act funding. Well, it also means that we can only do what's prescribed in those kinds of fundings. And it takes the community of folks who are wanting to respond to this, like Childhood, like the Nomi Network, who have braided funding sources that come from a variety of folks who are very passionate and interested in this piece. And I think that that there should be no confusion that government funding is not the be all end all for these kinds of programmatic elements. And in truth, there's no way to fund all of the aspects of what it means to take comprehensive and holistic response to what's happening in our communities. And I just want to affirm that our work is looking at this whole person, whole environment, the whole situation, trying to make sure that we're addressing those things. And a part of that is making sure that we have healthcare and mental health and safety and housing and legal and education and job, and looking creatively at how do we get education when a child should not go back to school where they're being victimized. Financial stability, what does that look like in relationships and community and belonging? These kids are hurt in relationship, and the true way that they're going to recover is in relationship. And we learned that from our friends at the Trust-Based Relational Interventions at TCU. We're implementing that empowerment in so many pieces of what we're doing. We're trying to ask the right questions, trying to see how we can help people to step out of trafficking. So we're providing drop-in centers and those kind of locations where they can get resources that they don't have to exchange sexual abuse for things that they need. How do they get to the resources? And our friends at the Dallas County Juvenile, provide some level of resources and connections to all of those pieces in the community. And I just want to affirm with Albert and his group, they're really being proactive and creative. And I just love this. Their work with their clinicians has identified several ways that we can help to expand the network. And those educational opportunities are really important. But we also have a group of other community kids who need to be, looking at how we can provide those kind of resources. And that means looking for more nonprofits, those that are in this space, and really provide a foundation for these kids that are working with their families. And how does this help them to prevent the issues of trafficking? We've done a series of webinars with Dr. Shannon Deere and Cheryl Miller from Quantum Consulting. They've also provided some education on what does it mean to work with corporations and education and all of that. Our Texas Workforce Commission has specialized mentors for folks who've been trafficked to find the right kind of job fit for them. So I think for us, it's looking at whole persons, and within the whole systems, how do we get the leverage that we need to get them the resources that they need, so that we're not just giving a hand out, but we're giving a hand up. And if you've ever done any community development, you know the whole when helping hurts, and the empowerment model that goes along with that. That's the way that we're thinking, even as the child sex trafficking team, is how do we do the most good for these kiddos who've been trafficked, get upstream, get downstream, and then partner with folks that are doing the slice of the pie that we cannot do, and then making sure that we have connections so that that collaboration really does bring the gear system together, so that people know when we have a partner like Nomi Network, let's make sure that they're connecting with all of our resource centers, New Friends, New Life, the Juliet Fowler Youth Center. How do we get them connected to whatever's happening on the ground? And a part of that is conversations after conversations, collaborative meetings, those kinds of things. And there are many who are wanting to work on this and just need somebody to give them a motivational traction, if you will, to work together. And there's enough work to go around.
Yeah.
We don't have to worry about that. And I applaud you guys for looking at Dallas and really working intentionally and focused on this space, because we have a lot of kids here who really need the opportunities that you guys are going to provide. Thank you. Kudos. And if you are a person out there who has financial resources to support these kind of organizations, if you're a foundation, if you're that kind of entity that can help to provide supportive funds for that, we applaud you. Go do good, therefore. Right?
I love
And
that.
we'll be
I love that. Do
collaborating.
good and go forth. And for that, and thank you, Tommy. And for that, we're going to do good and go forth. I really would like to open this discussion for the next 5 to 10 minutes to our listeners. Please do share questions or comments or to our panelists if there are any other thoughts that you'd like to share. I think it's so important. We all play a very important role to protect our communities. So we want to support the work of Nomi Network, the World Childhood Foundation. We're committed to finding these innovative programs that are transformative in the lives of the children and helping to create family protective environments. So I will now open this up if any of our panelists want to share their thoughts, their suggestions or solutions, or even bring up something that hasn't been addressed thus far. So let's see if there are any questions from our public. Okay. Well, then, I think it would be also great if we could bring up Bella and Albert, because in addition to the work that is being done by Tommy and Sherrod, but I think it's so great. Bella, thank you again for sharing your story with us. We are so appreciative of the honor of that. But really, how we can work within the system and outside of the system, as Tommy mentioned, to really create this holistic approach. So what can we, for example, I know that we have listening, we probably have individuals who say, I'm not part of a foundation. I wish I could write, $1 million check and do this, but what can we as individuals do to support?
Albert, you want to go first?
Sure.
Okay.
Again, I think as individuals supporting organizations such as Nomi that is willing to go out and provide services for youth who really need them. I think that as an individual, that's what we can do. I love that Tommy mentioned that it really takes a village, and it's a village of a variety of supportive services. As a department, we have different agencies that we work with that provide resources to the youth and families that we work with. It's another opportunity to place our youth in front of individuals who have that commitment to wanting to serve others, to really help that individual get to a better place, whether it be through mentoring, through teaching them a skill, through just being that support. Our youth need that, and so it's critical that individuals go out and really seek opportunities to do that. Years ago, I was involved in Big Brothers Big Sisters, so that's one way as an individual that you can go out and help others. It doesn't always have to be a financial commitment. It can be your time and effort, and in a lot of ways that goes even further, because you have that opportunity to create that relationship with a young person, and placing these youth in front of individuals who want to foster a strong, appropriate relationship that they can continue to have contact for years to come is important.
That's great. I think we lost Bella, but I also know that Britta, she's worked in this field, this child protection field, for over a decade. And so I do, but you don't look it. But I would love to hear some of your additional thoughts as well, in terms of funding and how we can all play a role in supporting this work.
I think actually what my thoughts were more maybe not as constructive, rather kind of self-critical to the field, I would say.
No, please do.
I think that the trafficking field kind of suffers from having a kind of an idea or notion that this is a very kind of black and white field, and that this is something that you can kind of separate from other challenges that young people may have. I don't think that has not been the case in the conversation today. On the contrary, but I do see a lot of bad practices, actually, a lot of kind of bad practice in investments in programs that we want to kind of rescue 3 million young people at the same time through kind of very simplified messages that I don't think actually will help anyone. Or we want to kind of invite a trafficking survivor to make people understand what this is, but actually when we invite that survivor, we kind of ask that person to share very personal issues without kind of really taking into account the kind of the broader issue, and without really empowering that person, and in that way we're kind of stigmatizing that person. So I think there is a lot we as a field are doing. We're also doing a lot of programming that is kind of contributing to fragmentation in the field rather than kind of building the whole system. So I think we as a field sometimes need to be a bit have even more reflection about how we're working with this issue, and ensure kind of that embedded in a broader child protection field. And maybe it's not that important if this is a trafficking survivor or a child sexual abuse survivor, because if we work kind of preventively and holistically, a lot of the kind of programs and responses would be the same anyway. So back to the supportive networks and having a kind of holistic, empowering ambition to everything we do and work together.
Absolutely. And I think it is important for us to be self-reflective, right? And to make sure that we are amplifying solutions that, as you've shared, are completely holistic and are creating protective environments. And even when we say family protective environments, maybe even saying child-friendly protective environments, right? Because family sometimes is not the safest place. And then Tommy's also shared this, and we would be remiss. We recognize that when we're talking about exploitation, abuse, child sexual abuse materials, that knows no borders, right? That is a real child, whether that is online or offline. And so we need to address this as well. because our children need to be protected. And I would say for all of us currently, we are still in the midst of a COVID pandemic, and many of our children are home with their abusers. Many of our children are being exploited online, and unfortunately that will continue. We know that we've seen these increases. At this point, as we are sort of wrapping up this webinar, I just want to first say thank you very much to all of our panelists today who participated, who shared their knowledge, their experience, and most importantly, their solutions to keeping our children safe from exploitation and trafficking, not only in Dallas, but across the globe. And I would just like to thank all of you for taking your time, whether it's this morning, this afternoon, or later today when we replay this webinar, to say thank you for caring. And thank you, as Tommy so eloquently said, we need to do good and go forth. So in doing good and go forth, I can't help but think of the World Childhood Foundation's foundress, Her Majesty Queen Sylvia of Sweden, who created the World Childhood Foundation 22 years ago when she was in Brazil and saw a little boy who was homeless, living in a box. And when she left, she worried as the rainstorms came down, what would happen? It is only when we continue to have conversations like that, we can save the little boys and the little girls who need help, but also to allow them to write their stories and create it in the image that is best for them, knowing that we have an obligation to the most vulnerable in our society, and that is our children. Thank you very much again. And on behalf of the World Childhood Foundation USA and the Nomi Network, we thank you for joining us. Have a wonderful day.